Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast,
a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, and anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend. Hey everybody, welcome back and thank you so much for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast. Mariano Alvarez here with Brent Labrada. We want to welcome you guys back for this is episode 1 of season 2 and we couldn't be more excited. This podcast has grown so much faster than we originally thought it was going to, and all of that is due to the amazing support that you guys have been giving us, and we want to thank you guys so much. And I also want to give some shout outs to people who have been showing us love on email. What's up to Brent, Barna, Lucia Diaz, Keshia Farand. Keshia, by the way, we've been meaning to get back to you. There's a few people we have to get back to. We apologize, guys. We've seen the emails and we will get back to you. It's just been a bit hectic around here, but we love you very much and we're not going to leave you hanging. Keshia has a podcast of her own that's geared more toward the rescue world, and she was kind enough to invite Brent and I to be on, and we're honored and we'd love to. So absolutely, Keshia, we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But if you hear this first, yes, let us know, reach out to us. Let's get that scheduled. And we thank you so much. And with that, over to you, man.
Indeed. He said something. He said, we love you guys, and we totally do love you guys. And just want to thank you guys for all of, the DMs and the emails and the Facebook messages and for sharing this podcast. And we love you guys. So you guys brought us back for a season 2. And, as it goes, we're looking at how we're going to make this better every single time. We're super excited for our trip in August, which we told you guys about in the close of season 1. It's getting closer and closer, and we actually just booked all of our hotel rooms, and it's legit. It's going down. So thank you guys again for being such wonderful listeners. And to start off today's episode, this kind of goes back to some of the interviews that we had in season 1, specifically Sarah Bruschi, Michael Ellis, Denise Fenzi, some of these really amazing sport dog trainers. And what we realize in this podcast, just interviewing all these people, is kind of this huge divide between, not divide in a bad way, but divide in context between sport dog training and the pet dog world, right? And it is very different, and we got to learn that firsthand here on this podcast. However, there are some really, really great things that we learned from that side of the world. And the other day, Mariano reached out to me. He had this really awesome epiphany. And so I wanted to hand it off to Mariano so he can kind of explain his idea a little bit better.
Sure. So my idea was this. I called Brent one morning. It was like a Saturday morning. And it was understanding the differences in the sport dog world versus the pet dog training world. And what are the ups and downs of this whole thing? And what exactly where does this leave us right now? Right. And what sparked this was, I noticed that in the sport dog world, kind of like in the human sport world, the reason I think that dogs are just sharper and their averages are so much closer, meaning like the weakest link versus the strongest dog are really similar versus the pet dog world. There's all different kinds of trainers and outcomes of dogs out there.
Right.
It's because they have the ability to mix it up and to communicate and to really kind of test their skills and test their mettle against other dogs and other trainers. But the only reason why that works is because they have a certain set of rules, of goals, right? Like everybody runs the foot race the same way. Somebody may train and practice differently, but on race day, you've all got to do the same thing in the same way. And so I think that's what gives the sport dog world enough unity for them to like all be speaking the same language in a sense. Versus in the pet dog world, there's constant infighting, there's constant just this and that, R plus versus balance. And even within the different, R plus and balance, there's all this different fighting and stuff going on because nobody can agree essentially on a very clear set of objectives. What are we looking for from training? What are we looking for in our trainers and our dogs and our clients? And so that stuck out to me because if we could come up with some semblance of a unified set of expectations, then like the sport dog world, we could start to incrementally make progress toward getting better and better, right?
Right.
And, a couple things that stuck out to me were in the sport dog world, one of the biggest differences, of course, probably the single biggest difference if I think about it, is typically speaking, the dog's handler is also the owner who tends to also be a trainer, right? Versus in the pet dog training world, trainers train dogs for owners who are not dog trainers. They do their own thing. They have their own lives. And for that reason, usually the level of consistency, the follow through isn't the same.
Right.
The
People want their convenience.
People want their convenience, and then also people just have their own ideas of what's good enough. You know, like you and I were talking about. Brent and I have talked before about. Have you, as a trainer, ever been more nitpicky with the client than they were with themselves? Like, I do it all the time, to where it's like, hey, he's pulling ahead of you just a little bit. Like, he's not necessarily pulling on the leash just yet, but he's out of heel position. He's a little
He's
ahead.
thinking about it.
Right.
Yeah.
And the owner just kind of doesn't care. And
Yeah.
I know that they don't care because they like half-ass address it, but not really. And I'm like, you guy, what do you do? Like, you know, fix it, you know?
Right.
And they're like, well, he's just pulling, and I take the dog and I, you know, and I fix it in 2 seconds. And I'm like, look, you could have done this. I know you know how. We're not talking a new client here, right? But people have their own expectations and then their own ideas of what they find to be sufficient, which is, that kind of is what it is, because of course it's their dog. But it's something that I think really helps delineate the difference between the sport dog world and the pet dog world. And, you know, that to me shows a bit of a degree in leadership, in a sense. And what I mean is, sport dog trainers / owners tend to be already very good at dealing with dogs. They're managing, they're training, their relationship building, their communication skills are all just on another level than the average client. And I think that there's a really important reason for this, which Brent's going to get into here in a second. But these are the ideas that kind of popped into my head, and we were trying to figure out how exactly we can turn this into a valuable message to you guys. So with that, over to you, bro.
Yeah. Thanks, man. You know, what's interesting in as pet dog trainers, we have kind of different realms of clients, right? Like sometimes we get clients who are super proactive and they go out of their way to be ahead of bad behavior, right? Those are the people that call you for proper puppy raising and strategies and making sure that they properly socialize. And those clients, probably some of the easiest, because they have the willingness to do the right thing from the get, right? And then we have people who, they give us a call when their dog starts kind of getting out of control, and then they're like, all right, this isn't horrible, but I can see it turning horrible. So they're giving us a call to kind of correct certain bad behaviors, right? And ultimately the expectation of that owner is, I just want this dog to stop going down that path, right?
Right.
And then we have another percentage of clients that the dog's already fucked. The dog's already bit. The dog's already lunging. The dog's already growling. The dog's doing something already, scary to them. And now they want us as dog owner or dog trainers to help them, right? And the interesting thing is, there's a high percentage of dog owners who kind of are unwilling to change and unwilling to do everything that we say. And I was listening to some Gary Vee the other day, and he said this quote. He said, 100% of my clients do less than 50% of what I tell them to do. And when he said that, obviously, if you guys listen to Gary Vee, he's a great businessman, entrepreneur, and people pay him millions of dollars to make, campaigns for them, marketing campaigns. And their companies, he says, 100% of them do less than 50% of what I tell them to do. And I thought that was so hilarious, because as a dog trainer, I feel like that practically every day, right? And so if you guys can relate to this, the natural question that stems from this is like, all right, if 100% of my clients do less than 50% of what I tell them to do, the natural question is, well, how do I get them to do more than 50%, right? And one of the interesting things is, as we get better as a dog trainer, our 50% of influence changes. Our 50% of, the change that we're able to make in that dog's life changes in potency, if you will, right? And so one thing I can say is that 50% of what I taught clients, let's say I did get a client to do minimum 50%. What I did 6 years ago is, I think what I do now 6 years later is more potent than what I did 6 years ago, right? So naturally, we start seeing more successful clients. We start seeing better troubleshooting. But we start seeing, the goal is, how do we help more? How do we influence clients more? How do we help them help their dogs more, right? And so this kind of comes down to breaking down, how is it that we as dog trainers, right? One thing I pulled from Mariano's explanation of things was, I was thinking like, all right, well, how is it that, if we don't have trophies and medals and, things like that, how is it that we as dog trainers helping clients, which, it's not a fair playing field. The rules are not necessarily in our favor all the time when dealing with clients. There's a money thing. There is a time limit thing. How is it that we go about fixing or making sure that we have more of an influence and a better impact? And that's something that we want to talk about as soon as we come back from this little break that we're going to take. So we'll see you guys in a minute.
Hey guys, Mariano here with the Dog Trainers Podcast. I wanted to remind you to check us out on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Dog Trainers Podcast. We appreciate all the love and support, and now, back to the show.
All right, guys, welcome back, and thank you again so much for listening. So let's dive right back in with this point. Just before break, Brent was explaining Gary Vee's problem, right? 100% of his clients do less than 50% of what he tells them to do. And I think that we can all agree that we've been there before when it comes to most dog training clients. And one thing that we've really tried to take note of is how can we then make the 50% that they listen to more worthwhile than maybe the 50% we could have given them like 3 or 4 years ago, right? When we weren't as experienced as dog trainers. So one example of that would be, how is your storytelling ability? Make sure that that's getting better over time. And there are ways in which to go about that and somewhat kind of gauge that and make sure that you're progressing. But that's something that I always thought was a fascinating point. If they're only going to listen to half of what you say, make sure that half is really, really good, because if there's only half of it, then it becomes twice as important, right? So when it comes to how you can draw from experiences and stories, how would you say would be a great way to look into that kind of thing, Brent?
Yeah, man. So storytelling has been such a huge tool that I use in my toolbox, right? And I saw my mentors do it for many, many times. And as time goes by, you learn to make stories based on your personal experience, right? But the whole goal of storytelling is to help align the person's mental and emotional understanding of a concept so that they align quicker, right? Because a lot of times, I remember when I was a younger trainer, I'd be so busy, explaining the how to do something, right? Let's say, for example, well, this is how you hold the leash. This is how you fit the collar. This is how you give a treat. This is how you do a marker, right? Like the hows, the technical stuff. And I wasn't really explaining the why, right? And then I've seen the opposite of that where, I've worked with a lot of dog trainers where they're explaining the why a lot. Like, well, you need to be a leader, and you need to really motivate the dog, and you really need to do this and that, but they're not really explaining the how, right? And so in essence, a good story helps kind of lay out like a who, what, where, when, and why kind of thing, right? For our clients. And I think not only does storytelling help you explain things better, but it also helps you develop rapport and like a camaraderie with your clients. And that's been a huge tool for me, right? And so, depending on what side of that spectrum you are you busy explaining the how too much, or are you busy explaining the why too much? You've got to find that perfect balance of the two. And there are some people that need more why, and there are some people who need more how, right? There are some people who are just, it's hard for them to understand like how putting their dog in a crate is going to affect their separation anxiety. There are some people who it doesn't make sense how letting our dogs not heel or letting our dogs not pull is going to help them with, counter surfing. Like it's hard for them to make these correlations per se. But our job in storytelling is to try and find those stories that we can pull from our life experience, from our dog training experience, maybe even things outside of the realm of training, right? Like sports or jujitsu, as Mariano always brings up, right? Like this stuff helps align people's thoughts and emotions faster so that they can learn the technical skill.
I'm going to bring it up just one more time, and here's why.
Yeah.
So when we talk about dancing that line or figuring out exactly how much of this versus that, right? The how versus the why. The way that I personally dance that line, there isn't some blueprint I go into it with. I'm explaining some of this, and as I see them, like, there's almost that like, okay, I've taken a good amount of information, now there's like diminishing returns. Maybe I'm losing them or something, then I'll kind of spill back into that. Maybe they start questioning this, and then I go over to that. So like I'll kind of play the game with them, and naturally, because I'm playing based off of them, I can see some require more how-to. Some people are just type A, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Versus some people are like, I get it, but are you sure this isn't going to like hurt their
Right.
feelings? Are you sure
Right.
that he's not going to think I'm abandoning him in the crate? So
Right.
naturally, the reason why I bring up the jiu-jitsu thing is because, as we've talked about before, the white belt dog trainers, they tend to have this preconceived, almost this like pre-scripted idea of what they're going to say because their knowledge base is simple enough. And I'm not hating, I'm just calling it like it is, right? It's kind of simple enough and like face value enough that they've kind of got their explanations, panned out in their heads, how they're going to say stuff roughly. And they don't quite have the comfort level to like dance around with it much. And because
Right.
of that, it doesn't feel like a conversation. I think you know what I
Right.
mean, Brent, when,
Yeah.
when we've been working with other trainers who are newer, who it's not that they don't know their stuff because they do. And it's not that they don't have good people skills because they do. But it doesn't sound like an easy breezy kind of conversation between a professional and a client. It sounds
Right.
like someone who's giving like a speech in high school. Right?
Yeah.
It's
Yep,
got like
yep,
this
yep, yep.
preconceived kind of like pace and tempo, and you're not really reading the room. You're just reading off of your paper so you can be done, so you can sit down. And
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that's why I bring up the jiu-jitsu thing, because the more comfortable you get explaining, and just the more comfortable meaning not only the better you get at it, the more knowledge you have around it, which means you can have more lateral motion, more fluidity. But because of that, the more like actual comfortable you are, the more relaxed you are, then now you're just engaging with a human being. And you
Right.
get to have this kind of free-flowing, helpful conversation. And because of that, you can connect with them better. The points that you're making may very well have been good, only you didn't quite connect. And Brent hits the nail right on the head, and that's something that when we were working together, I noticed he did very well, is sometimes you'll bring up little things, and it could be the tiniest thing. It could be like a one-liner joke type thing that has nothing to do with dog training, but it just shows people like, hey, I get you, and it's just enough to like diffuse tension, or to like to put their nerves at ease and stuff like that, right?
Right.
And I won't harp too much on it, but I'm just going to give
Well,
a
some of it's the Hippocratic method, like it's Hippocrates, like his ability to converse and debate and all that stuff.
Right.
I didn't know that that's what I was doing until I studied it, and I was like, oh, that's dope.
essentially it boils down to, we're coming from two different places right now, but in order for us to have any hope of finding middle ground, let's start this conversation from the premise that we're both looking for the same thing. We just have two different ideas on how to get there. And where it really comes in handy.
Socratic method.
Right.
I sound like an idiot. I don't know. I'm thinking of a different Hippocrates.
Oh, Socratic.
I just realized it was.
You're welcome, everybody. This is why we're dog
Sorry.
trainers and not like theorists, okay?
Yeah. Thanks. I'm so glad. Sorry, Hippocrates did other things. My bad. It's Socratic. I did
No
study
worries.
it. I swear, guys. Freudian slip.
No worries. Sorry.
I was just like, is it? It is Socratic method. So I just
Yeah.
Googled that shit. Sorry.
No problem.
Happens.
No problem. Okay. So here is an excellent example in action. This is a real example of how a trainer can use something like this to diffuse somebody's suspicion, okay? Obviously, these people come seeking a trainer, meaning they're coming to you in good faith, right? What happens when you meet with a client, you do the evaluation, and you realize, wow, this dog needs structure, this dog needs, this and that, and the owners just aren't quite comfortable doing that. Obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be in this position, right? And so let's say, okay, your dog is becoming a little too attached to you. He's becoming territorial, possessive in these COVID days because you're working from home. You need to start creating them more, or at least separating yourself more. And they're uncomfortable with that. And now, if you really kind of dive into it, and you'll know what I mean, is when you really kind of dive into how they're feeling about you in that moment, as you're saying this to them, they're starting to think like, I don't think they get it. I don't think they this. I don't think they that. Like, I think that, it's almost like they're starting to think you don't care about the dog, right? So the easy way for you to kind of diffuse that little bit of suspicion right there is to be lighthearted for a second. An example being, I met a potential client the other day. Eval was going great, but the mom was a little nervous about structure and stuff like that. And it just so happens that her husband, who I had already met, like he was around and getting ready for work, and so he's getting ready to leave. And they're like an older couple. So this surprised me. He's getting ready for work. He comes back out to the room where we are with a moto jacket on. And I was like, "Whoa, you ride?" You know, and then he and I had like a little 5-minute conversation about bikes and stuff. You know, and I could and she too, like she just got on a bike and it was this whole thing, right? Nothing to do with dog training, but it kind of reminded her like, "Hey, I'm a person too. Like I you know, like we all, like I enjoy my life too. Like you know, like little things that shouldn't be related, but they are." And then once I kind of diffused that tension and just had a pleasant conversation period with her, then when I dove right back into crate training, she was more open to the concept. I'm not just this cold robot to her. I'm not just some professional who doesn't give a shit about your situation. I'm somebody who cares about you.
Yeah. I mean, it helps break the tension.
Exactly.
For sure.
Right. Like
and
you said,
and that's
you know, I think I got this from you, who got this from your dad, is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
100%. Yeah. And I see that dancing of that line a lot. And it's really difficult sometimes with certain owners, right? And you know, this whole 50% idea. There are some clients that do 70%, some clients that do 8%. Those are the easy ones. Those are the ones who are just like, that's awesome. You know, those are the ones that make you look really good at your job because they do most of the work.
Right. So if you guys are listening, if you could send us those clients, be sure to reach out to us.
Please just send us those clients. That'd be great.